Hey guys, how's it going? It's Thomas Brush. I make indie games for a living. And the older I get and the more advanced I get in my career, the more obsessed I am with creating scalable processes. So for example, if I wanted to make a game that looked like Hollow Knight, I'd rather it be a scalable process, meaning these illustrations you see here in Hollow Knight, these aren't all done by hand. All the coloring, all the lighting, all the blur effects, all this stuff isn't done by hand. Instead, I would rather it be scalable and be done quickly inside of Unity using Unity's tools that are built in, right? So if I hit play here in my Unity project, by the way, if you want to download this project file, click below. You can download it, use it however you want. Just don't use the characters here because these are actually done by Team Cherry. But everything else here is just a sample of how to achieve the Hollow Knight look. Again, this is dumbed down, but it's to show you how these simple graphics look beautiful with a few effects. Okay, so this is the Hollow Knight look. We've got depth of field, we've got parallax, the camera moves and things shift at different rates. We've got global fog that slowly makes things more and more foggy. The beauty of what you're seeing here is this is all just a Photoshop document, okay? And here is the Photoshop document. It looks horrible, minus the character art. The character art looks incredible. Again, don't use these if you're going to be using this project folder. Very simple. These are just textures I downloaded from a free asset pack on the Unity Asset Store. Okay, I just pulled these in and used them on top of this illustrations. But just grayscale, right? Just grayscale sprites brought into Unity and laid out in a parallax. Okay, sort of just layered them in this sort of parallax layout. And again, this camera is a 3D camera, meaning it's using perspective projection, not orthographic, which is what you typically see with 2D games. So this isn't necessarily as simple as it might seem. You just drag in the assets, you put a camera out there, and you're good to go. Honestly, the hardest part of this was the shader. We're going to get into the shader and all of that. Again, all of this is downloadable below. But let's first and foremost start with the PSB importer. If we have a Photoshop document like this with a variety of assets or layers here, you can't just save this file as a PSD, a Photoshop document, which is the default. You can't just save it as that and then bring it into Unity and expect it to work. You need to actually install the PSD importer package. So just go to Window, Package Manager, and there it is, 2D PSD importer. Make sure you search PSD if you don't see it, and make sure Unity Registry is selected. Go ahead and install that, and your PSB file will actually create a collapsed sort of file here in your project window. And you can see we have all of our sprites here. So let me move my face here. There we go. So we have all these different sprites here, and these are just the layers, and they're named appropriately, which is really, really cool. So now we can actually just drag these into Unity, and it's going to create game objects with our various sprites here. Okay. The next thing I'm going to talk about is, well, how do you get the sprite renderer? Okay, this is typically used for 2D games, not 3D games or 2.5D games. How do you get the sprite renderer to actually, well, not only be lit and get affected by lighting, but also blend in with the fog? I kind of had trouble with this, so I had to Google it, which is totally fine. And right here, I found this Reddit post, and this is from Dwin Timelon. Thank you, Dwin Timelon. And a friend of yours made a sprite shader. So let's click on this link here, and you can see this sprite shader is ready to go. It's called Sprite Diffuse with Fog. And again, this is in the project files below. So just go ahead and either download the project files or just copy this shader over into Unity. And you can use that shader for your various sprites here. All you got to do is make sure you create a new material. In my case, I called it Sprite Fog. And then I used the Diffuse with Fog shader here. And now all of our sprites are actually affected by the fog. So if we go to the Lighting tab, and if you don't see that, just go to Window, General, or Rendering, Lighting. Go to the Environment tab here. You can see I can tweak our fog values, right? We can make it a yellow fog if we wanted to, which is really cool. The reason you're not seeing that fog color show up in the background is because that's actually associated with the camera color, okay? So if we made that color the same color as the fog, something like, let's say, and maybe something like that. Then you could have a sort of beautiful going from blue to a yellow color. So now our shader is affected by the fog. So that's really, really important. If you don't have that, you're not going to get that depth, right? The next thing I want to talk about is, well, talking about lighting associated with this new shader, okay? So what a lot of 2D artists typically do is they sort of bake in the lighting while they're illustrating inside of Photoshop. So what I typically used to do is I would go, okay, well, if I want this to be a blue colored brick wall, I'm going to maybe change the hue saturation of this layer here. So I'd go to hue saturation. I'd add some to this block here. I'd colorize it, right? Make it a little bit blue. But what we're going to do inside of Unity here is just have the lighting attached to the player, okay? So if I go to my player here, select him, you can see we have actually 3 light sources, and they're all 3 different kinds of lights. We have a spotlight, okay? So if I turn off my spotlight, you can see it's this very subtle light green light that sort of scatters around the entire scene, okay? We have a point light, which is right on the player, right? If we turn that off, you can see it's this just vibrant green here. And if we take a look at it, there it is. It's got a pretty big range here, right? But it's right up against the player, just right there. And again, it's going to follow the player wherever the player goes because it's a child of the player. You can see right here, it's a child of the player. And then finally, we have a directional light that sort of just washes the whole scene in a very subtle color. Hollow Knight is so beautiful, obviously for a variety of reasons, but mainly because I think it's got always a gradation of color. Pink to purple, right? Teal to blue, right? Or in this case, we have a very distinct coloring, but we've got like an orange to blue, right? So every level kind of has a gradation to it. This one is the Forgotten Crossroads. This one is the only scene, I think, that doesn't have a very distinct gradation, although you can see a little bit of purple and a little bit of blue, okay? That is achieved, in my case, not necessarily this is how Team Cherry did it, but the way that I'm going to do it is if you change the directional light to be sort of a contrasting color to that green color. So in my case, maybe this purple color. If we increase the intensity, you can see it more, okay? So you can get a subtle gradation of color going from this bluish color or this greenish color here out to this intense purple color. So you can just play with those lights and play with the fog, and you can change the entire color of the level. And again, it's really important to note, it's because we're using grayscale sprites. If we didn't have grayscale sprites, it would be much harder to do, okay? So that's how we're using lighting in our scene, how we're using fog in our scene, and obviously layering in our scene using just what's typically used for a 3D game. We're using that for a 2D game. Now let's talk about these layers really quick. You can see here they're sort of organized pretty cleanly. They're not just random. And the way that I'm doing that is I just have these collapsed game objects here, okay? We have foreground close. There's nothing in that currently. We have foreground, we have ground, we have midground close, we have midground, we have background close, and we have background far, okay? So we have all these various layers here. Background far and foreground close we're not even using, so I could disable them if I wanted to. But inside of each of these layers here are various objects. So for the ground layer, I've chosen to put my player there and all of the ground that the player can walk on. Now, these are all zeroed out in terms of their Z position. See? They're always at the 0 position locally to the parent. And that's so that we can just simply copy and paste, and they're automatically going to be exactly where they need to be in the Z axis, right? So we can just create our world in this layer and not have to worry about the exact position. Just make sure it's at the 0 position as a child, okay? Now, the other reason why we're using all of these different layers as opposed to just sort of randomly throwing our assets throughout the scene and changing their Z position is so that the parent can have a sorting group on it. And this sorting group is going to tell the sprite renderer, all the sprite renderers here, what sorting layer they are on. Otherwise, you're going to see just a bunch of random sorting and it's going to look confusing. Now, this wouldn't be true if these were actual quads in a three-dimensional game, but that's sort of besides the point. Because we're using sprite renderers, we need to make sure we use the sorting group component here to tell the sprite renderer which sorting layer it needs to appear on. So if we go to our sorting layers really quick here, you can see we have about 6 layers here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers. 7 layers here, and they're all named pretty specifically here on which layer is what, okay? And then I've just specified them here, and it allows us to basically see a variety of layers stacked on top of each other, okay? Now, it's important to note that the prefabs are all set up so that they can be edited, right? If we didn't use prefabs, we would have a lot harder time to edit the prefab. So for example, if I really wanted this stalactite to be a little bit darker, I could actually tweak the color of the sprite and make it darker if I wanted to. Or if I wanted it to be kind of yellow, right? I could do it this way, right? So now they're a little bit more yellow, right? And it all happened on the fly, very fast, okay? So just remember, if you're gonna reuse a game object more than once, make it a prefab. And that prefab can be used over and over and over again and edited only once, and it's gonna change across your level, okay? So I can edit it back to white, and we're good to go, okay? All right, the final thing that I wanted to talk about here, and again, if you want to download these project files, please do so. It's going to help you when you're learning how to do this. You can just dig into the project files and get an idea of what I've done here. This is particularly true for the blur effect because you might be confused about what I'm about to tell you. Long story short, blurring each layer incrementally with something like a post-processing effect called depth of field. That depth of field camera effect doesn't really work that well with two-dimensional objects that use the sprite renderer, okay? The sprite renderer just, long story short, doesn't handle the depth of field effect very well. We can blur a whole camera though. So that's why I have two cameras. I have a BG camera, a background camera, and also a main camera. The main camera has a few post-processing effects on it. You can see here, post-process default. This is actually what the main camera is using. And again, download the project files if you're confused. The default camera effects are just simply bloom. It's just going to give it that little subtle glow, vignette here, and also grain, okay? But the post-processing background, this volume here, uses a different post-processing effect, and that's just the depth of field. And this is only applied to the background camera. So if I disable the camera here, all of those objects in the background are disabled along with their camera effects. So we're only getting a blur in the background. And I thought this doesn't feel like what Hollow Knight does, but actually if I look at Hollow Knight, it looks like there's not a lot of variability in terms of their blur. It looks like there's only a blur starting on the third layer back here, and it goes back. There's not even a blur in the foreground. So I was definitely encouraged to see this. It looks like they're only blurring everything sort of at a constant rate. I could be incorrect here, but this is definitely going to work for us. So we're just going to blur anything sort of past that third layer, and that's with a separate camera. And you just want to make sure that when your cameras are set up, that the culling mask does not include the background layer here, okay? Whereas the background camera, the only thing it includes for the culling mask is the background, okay? And that is being defined on our background right here. See how this layer is set to background? And all of his children are set to background, okay? All right, so that's how you make Hollow Knight pretty fast, right? So go ahead and download these project files, guys, and take a look. Dig through them, use them however you want. Again, just don't use the artwork that Ari created from Team Cherry. These are beautiful assets that are from his brain, so don't use them. But the method here, you can use it however you want. And again, a huge, huge, huge thanks to this Redditor here, Dwayne Timelon, for the script that your friend created. Thank you for sharing. This is a great shader. for this purpose. Anyways, guys, thanks so much for hanging out. This was really, really fun. Be sure to click like, subscribe, leave a comment, and download my free 2D game kit below. It's totally free. It's my treat to you. This game kit was made by me for the purpose of making a game for PewDiePie. So I actually used the game kit that you can see below in the description. That game kit was made for PewDiePie so that I could make a game for him, and then I got to play it with him on his channel, which was really fun. All right, guys, I'll talk to you later. Cheers. Get over here. Get down. Hey. Thanks for watching. By the way, if you haven't downloaded that free 2D game kit below, click below. It's my treat to you. I used this game kit to make a game for PewDiePie in 14 days, and I actually got to play it with him in front of his audience, which was really cool. This game kit is totally free. It's my treat to you, and you can use it however you want. You can make a commercial game and make $1 million off this game kit. I don't care. Or you could just use it for a hobby project. It's my treat to you. And by the way, if you haven't clicked like, that would mean a ton to me. Hit subscribe. And also, this is important, hit that notification bell. Here's why. If you get notified of when I'm live, you can watch me make my next game and let me know in the chat what you think about the game or any ideas you have, and you might just show up. Your chat might just show up in the next video that I upload. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye. I love you too.